I mean, the way I announce you each episode, I think, is probably the closest thing to a consistent catchphrase. Dr. Douglas P.
Use the radio voice.
Dr. Douglas P.
Welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. This week we're doing something special for the Salty Pastor Podcast. It's the final week of 2023, and we're going to look back and review this year. As you may know, this podcast is designed to coach you up in your faith. The more you know, the more you can grow. The importance of growing your faith is now more critical than ever, and we live in a society where there is no longer a unifying belief system that binds people together. There's no sense of moral clarity, no sense that this defining qualities of what it means to be an American citizen exist anymore. Based on this, how does a follower of Christ navigate such an environment? How do you know who you are and where you are going? The only way to navigate a world like that is to know what you believe and why you believe it. Our goal is to give you the tools, the facts, and the perspective to think for yourself. Our goal this week is to look back over the last year and see how we did. Remember the successes and the failures, the wins and the losses. So here, without further ado, is the Salty Pastor himself, Dr. Douglas Peak.
Hello, everyone, and so long, 2023. I hope that you guys are looking forward to a new year. It's always great to just be able to say fresh start, fresh things, new vision, new passion for the coming year. And that's what 2024 is going to be all about. Just a side note is that at the 1st of January, I will have completed 28 years of ministry as the lead pastor at Foothills Christian Church.
That is quite the impact, Pastor Doug.
Yeah.
I don't have stats on that, but I know you've impacted a lot of people's lives over your 28 years here. And I know that most pastors don't make it nearly that long at one single church. So we appreciate your commitment.
Were you born when I came here?
Yes, I am 35, so that means I think you started ministry 35 years ago, right? That was your...
I started in full-time ministry May of 1987, so that was 36, 37.
So what it is, I remember you were... A couple weeks ago was your anniversary, and you said you'd been married for 35
years.
So that's what the correlation was in my brain. I was like, something arrives.
I was born in the year that they got married.
Yes. So
see, I always tell people you could have been my son.
28 years, Pastor, at one church.
Just in one church, yeah.
Yes. So 2024 is a big year.
Yes.
And we'll be heading on year 99 of Foothills being a church at that point as well, right?
Yeah. It was incorporated in 1925.
So 2025 will be the big 100-year anniversary of that as well.
We've already started the planning.
Yes, we have. And we'll have in early 2024, we'll also hit our 365th episode of The Salty Pastor, which means you could listen to one episode every day for a year, unless it's a leap year. When's our next leap year? But anyways, you'll have enough content to get you by. And that's what we're kind of talking about this time is we've been doing this for a while. We just finished another year of the Salty Pastor, 2023, and we had quite the year, didn't we?
Yes, it was. It was really pretty amazing. I mean, we talked about a lot of things. You know, obviously on Tuesday we talked about all the Bible study we did. Now, you know, on Thursdays we talk about application of these biblical principles, and it's just interesting to me all the topics that we have had to cover. I mean, we talked about politics more than we've ever before. We're not a politically oriented church, but what is happening is we're seeing how the world in which we live, particularly in America, that politics is becoming more divisive, and it's becoming more about power and control over people. And so that's not good. And so we've talked a lot about that because we just feel like, well, we need to have a prophetic voice about that. And in many ways, the church is to be the conscience of the culture in which it lives. I think we've talked this year more than any time in my 37 years of full-time ministry about the sexualization of children, particularly in our public schools. You know, the desire to introduce children through sex ed courses to, you know, sexual identity issues, gender fluidity, all of these kinds of things. That is really odd to me. but it's important to talk about that.
Well, and I think all of these things are based on what we encountered this year, right? Like if you look back at the things that are going on in society, the Salty Pastor podcast stood up and said, we are going to talk about these things. We could have just said, we're just going to focus on the Bible. You figure out how to apply it in your own life. But you, from the beginning, have said, I want you to also be able to see how this is playing out in today and why these Bible verses and why we're studying this applies today. And so we talked about, like you said, politics. There's a lot going on politically, ideology-wise, and things that affect the things that happen in a Christian's life, and they need to know how to respond to that. And we talked about, like you said, the sexualization of children. What else? We've talked about men and women and the troubles they're facing based on what society expects of both of them, right?
Yeah, we really delved into that, and I'd have to say that I think during highs and lows, I'll address that a little bit more later on the podcast, but some of those, talking about women, of course, was a little frightening, but I was able to get through that. We talked about Islam and terrorism. We talked about, the one thing I think that we talked about too last year a lot was the My Political Jesus, where we talked about how Jesus isn't a political football and everybody's trying to use him as one.
Yeah.
And the biggest question that people have, they're trying, as Christians, trying to figure out where Paul says in Romans, it says you're to submit to governing authorities. And so people fight so hard for who they want to get elected because they're like, well, then I have to submit to that person, and I don't want to submit to that other person. And what I really postulated in that, I think it really rocked people's world, is I said, look, the president is not who this verse is talking about, because the president or the Congress is not the governing authority in the nation of the United States of America. And people are like, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's very important to understand it's the Constitution of the United States that is the governing authority over us as citizens. Okay? And so you have to submit to the governing authority, which is, in our case, the Constitution, and how different that was for people to think in those terms.
Right.
Because up until that point, the governing authority was always a person. It was a king, it was a dictator, a totalitarian, or whatever may be the case, right? But America was a new experiment, and say for the very first time, our governing authority is going to be the Constitution.
Right.
And so we talked about that, and we talked about, like, the influence of terrorism and what it's doing, and how much is that a part of mainline Islam, and how much of it is just a radical strain of it. We've talked about the sexual revolution. We really went into how that has influenced so many people thinking today. Me, I'm big on deconstructionism.
I was going to say, if it wouldn't be a year of the Salty Pastor without filling out your bingo card of deconstructionism and critical race theory.
That's right. Cultural Marxism, postmodern deconstructionism.
Yes.
So, we've talked about all of these topics, and I mean, and I'm sure there's a bunch more that I've even forgotten.
Yeah. I mean, I think we covered a wide swath this year, just with the overall theme of the kingdom of Jesus being kind of our leading thing. It allowed us to venture into a lot of new places and, focus on a lot of different topics. I mean, even just doing the parables over the summer, we went into all kinds of different places because those all touch on different aspects while also focusing all towards the kingdom of Jesus, right?
Did you have any favorite topics? Did you have anything that, like, because you host, and you got cues and all this stuff, but over the past year, were any of them particularly like favorites or impactful, or really change your thinking?
I always love Philippians. Philippians is great. Just focusing on, we did that series on lemons or lemonade, focused on, how do you deal with when things aren't great? Also that guilt one. I think that's something that really opened eyes for people. We did a whole series on guilt. Pack your bags and we're going on a guilt trip, which is basically just setting yourself free from all of the pressure of, well, I have to do X, Y, and Z, and you just constantly being like, stop feeling guilty for that. Jesus set you free from that, right?
Yeah.
We created a really great video for that.
I love the bump you did for that. It was so creative, and we did 4 weeks on that, didn't we?
Yeah.
We did 4 weeks, and you have a great bump when on the 4th week that people have seen it numerous times, and they were still laughing when they saw that bump.
Yes,
so that was a great bump you did there. And a bump for all of you Salty Pastor listeners is we play a little video before the message each time,
on
and
Sundays,
we call it a bump. It's about 20 to 30 seconds long,
Yeah.
and it just kind of is like an ad piece. We'll put it out on social media, but we do it for a lot of reasons, to try to help get people thinking in those terms,
Yeah,
right?
sets the tone, sets the
tone,
focus.
and it also allows us to change the stage.
Yes. Behind the scenes, it also lets us switch the stage over because it eats up some time where people aren't looking at the stage.
At the stage, yeah.
But yeah,
So-
we covered a lot of really great topics this year, and we've covered almost anything you can think of in some form or fashion throughout the year. So I thought that was all really good.
And then sometimes I'd say some pretty salty stuff.
Oh
on
my
our
gosh!
podcast.
I think we've got some clips of some of the reactions off camera I had when you
Yeah,
got
when I say something really salty, let's
cut-
watch.
Let's cut to those. No. The editing magic makes that a little bit easier to cut away from.
I think that's hilarious. That's hilarious. But, it hasn't all been cookies and cream. Sometimes we've had a few bloopers. I have to show some of the bloopers here real quick.
Yeah, we actually don't have the bloopers because if we had all of that, but we don't have as many of the bloopers as I'd want, is what I should say. We have a couple. The thing I tend to have the most, we don't tend to cut a lot in the
That is
in
true.
the podcast. We tend to go pretty straight through. The place that has the most bloopers usually is the intro, because I'll get going and my brain will kind of shut off midway through the intro and I'll mess up. So here's some clips of where I have not nailed the intro as well as you normally hear it. This podcast is designed to coach you up in your faith. The more you know, the more you can grow. One of our favorite ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it would help if you didn't constantly help me rewrite those every week. I used to have it down pat when it was the exact same thing every week, Pastor.
I like to mix it up. I like
you
variety.
Do. It's good. But my brain got so used to the one that every week I have to think really hard as I go through it, and I don't just default to the old one. So,
well, we got to think about a lot of our, what do you call it when you have a catchphrase or whatever? What are some of our catchphrases that we've used? The most recent one is the more you know, the more you can grow.
The more
right?
you know, the more you can grow. What you believe is the most important thing about you.
Yeah, and the other one, I remember what fluff is not enough.
Fluff is not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had quite a few. I think, a catchphrase would basically be deconstructionism on this podcast, but I don't think that's a slogan that we would be running around with.
That's right.
That doesn't go on
That's right.
shirts.
Yeah, that
unless
was a good
we do
one.
deconstructionism and it falls off halfway through. It just says deconstruction and then it
I'm
falls off.
deconstructing my
I'm
deconstruction.
deconstructing my merch.
Well, or about, we don't tell you what to think. We want you to think for yourself.
Yes. I think, the way I announce you each episode, I think, is probably the closest thing to a consistent catchphrase. Dr. Douglas
Always
Peak.
use the radio voice.
Dr. Douglas Peak.
Dr. Douglas Peak, yes.
I
Either
try
that
not
or
to
an
laugh whenever you say
either
that.
an MMA fighter or
really.
or the Salty Pastor. One of the two is coming out. We're unsure.
Or you're one of those barkers at the family circus or
Yes,
something.
at the circus. So, I think those are definitely some of them that have developed over not just this year, but all the years of the Salty Pastor. And I think it's just it's fun. We do mess up, and I think that's a peek behind the curtain. And you guys have heard us flub up even stuff that we haven't edited up. We'll mess up a word or whatever, but we appreciate that you guys let us be human, because that's ultimately what we are. We're just a work in progress just as much as you guys. We just happen to have some mics and enough technology to make it happen each week.
Well, we just have consistency. We keep showing up.
Yep,
That's
we just
part
keep
of it,
showing
isn't
up,
it?
and that was part
you
of.
telling me about one of the podcast, or the majority of podcasts. You gave me a stat one time, said something like 90% of podcasts stop after 13 episodes.
Yep, it's just hard for most people to come up with a schedule, and that's one, and be consistent about how they record and get them out. And we're really blessed between working here at Foothills and being able to make time for it. We also have the staff. So we've had a couple different editors this year on the podcast. Finn, who did a great job, and then Joe and Grace have both been editing over the last few months, and they've been really great as far as helping make sure we keep a consistent quality on the podcast, which I think is always important. Not just recording it, but it being something that's worth listening to as far as actually hearing it and being able to watch it, and it's pleasurable to listen to. So,
So how's some of the how's the podcast doing? I mean, what's some of the data on it?
the
How are we-
podcast
Yeah.
is going very well. We had over 20,000 downloads this year.
Wow.
Of episodes, which is, you divide that out, isn't exactly the number it sounds like, but it is a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
especially because you look at most podcasts and they maybe get like 100 downloads.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 20,000 is a large number, and I think it's something to be respected, and that's just proof of what God's doing and working in our in the kingdom and utilizing this to reach people, and people are resonating with it, that they are downloading it and listening to it. And that's just on the podcast side. That doesn't include the YouTube side, which those results are a little harder to quantify because we did actually switch the Salty Pastor podcast over to its own YouTube channel this year. So some of the analytics are a little skewed on that. And part of the reason we wanted to do that was to have more space for the Salty Pastor to grow and not be pushing out things that are supposed to be focused on the church or vice versa. And so we had even more views and watches on YouTube between all of the episodes we put on both of those. And so that has been really good. Some of our highest grossing episodes as far as like views and listens were focused on actually this most recent Christmas episodes have really been doing well. People are really liking the deep dive into what Christmas is all about, really. Our journey through Philippians was one of people's favorites. We had a lot of downloads of that one. A lot of people watched the journey through Philippians. Those episodes really were some of the most impactful ones, and people really loved them. So, and then obviously the Desperado series, we have a lot of male listeners, and they really, really were faithful when it came to the podcasts about Desperado, which were all focused on what's going on with men and how can men be better.
Yeah.
So those are just some stats. I mean, we also have I can give you some fun facts about where people are listening.
Yes.
We over 90%, 98% of them are in America, 60% being in Idaho, but then we have a pretty wide swath of people listening from other parts of the country. The only place we don't have anyone listening to currently is Louisiana. So if we can find a listener in Louisiana, I think we hit all 50 states.
So we got all the states in the lower 48 except for Louisiana.
Well, we even have Alaska.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Alaska's,
Anybody in Hawaii listening?
Let me look. I'm going to do this really quickly. Yes, we have some listeners in Hawaii. So
Sweet.
Louisiana is the only place we don't have a listener for some reason.
Anybody want to go to Louisiana with me?
Someone go to Louisiana and find us a listener.
Yeah.
But our other countries that are listening, they're not as high as percentage, obviously, but we do have some listeners in Spain, Germany, the UK, and Bermuda. Those are our top 4 outside the U.S. that are
really?
people
Maybe
are listening in.
Well, whoever's listening in Bermuda, why don't you send us a DM or an email, because I'd like to come visit you.
So we're reaching people, and a lot of that is due to, 1, our consistency, but 2, also our listeners sharing it, right?
Yeah, that is huge.
Making people know what it is, because, I mean, there's so many people with podcasts these days. So
yes,
finding a new podcast and just hoping that someone will stumble across it doesn't really work super well anymore, just because there's so many people doing it. It's so accessible, which is great, but also it really saturates the market. And so people like our listeners going out and saying, hey, have you ever heard of the Salty Pastor podcast? You should take a listen. That's how we've really grown over the last year. So that's been super great.
That's awesome. That is really awesome. So how fun to hear all that stuff. Well, I just want to say thank you, Salty Pastor crew that's out there listening and expanding it. Remember, our goal is just glorify Jesus, and the most important thing that is happening is when you're listening to the Salty Pastor and you're thinking about things, is what's happening between you and God, right?
Yes.
Not what's happening between you and me. It's what's happening between you and God and your faith. That's what's most important. And so I'm just honored that you allow me to help you in that interaction between you and God, in that you're growing in your faith, because that's really what is most important. It's your development, your maturity, your strength, your confidence, your courage, and its growth that makes the biggest difference in your own life, in your own faith, in your walk with Jesus. And so to be able to help you and encourage you, that is what brings me the greatest joy. And so I'm just so honored that you allow me to be a part of that. I'm honored that you allow me to into your life each and every week. I really want to say how much I appreciate, love and respect those who have just regularly listened. And so I just want to say thank you so much. And I just hope that I can continue to allow the Lord to just use me to encourage you to get to know him better, right?
Yes.
And so that's really good to hear. I'm really glad to hear how big it is. I'd love to see us really grow. We've really positioned ourselves to just be able to grow more, right?
Yes.
Like, for instance, if you're just listening to this episode on your phone or whatever, you can now bop over to the YouTube channel and you can see all the funny faces that Jesse makes when I say things that are really salty.
Yeah, if you're listening only, that section probably didn't make sense to you, but there was some great graphics and videos of my reactions.
And yeah, so if you just go to YouTube real quick and just search, Salty Pastor, it should pop up. The other thing that happened last year that's really, really big news is that we applied for, what do we call it, a copyright patent or a trademark or something like that for the Salty Pastor. And that went through and that's been approved, and that is now our registered trademark. So there can only be one Salty Pastor
only
on the
one.
internet.
There will, like the Highlander, there can only be one.
Yeah, that's right. So that's kind of exciting. So I am the one and only Salty Pastor on the internet.
We love that. So important.
That's so important. So that's kind of neat. But if you do go over to the YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Like and subscribe,
absolutely.
because we want to get that up to 1,000 subscribers or more. The more we can get, the better it will be. And so please go over there, like and subscribe, and that helps get it up. I mean, we just launched; it's already at like 100 subscribers. But in 2024, we'd like to get that up to 1,000 to 2,000 subscribers. And the reason why is because YouTube, They pretty much ignore you until you get 1,000 subscribers.
Yep.
They won't work with you. They don't give you links. They don't let you embed. They don't let you do anything
Right.
until you get to that point. So our goal is to try to get that up, and I'd love to try and get us to 10,000 subscribers on the Salty Pastor across the globe. And if nothing else, I'd like 50 people in Bermuda listening.
I was going to say, I feel like you want a very specific part of the globe that you're working at, but
Maybe we get 1,000 subscribers in Germany, I'd like to go back to the motherland. Love Germany. We spent some time there back in 2016, and we were down there in the kind of the Black Forest region, down there in Berchtesgaden and Salzburg and all that stuff, and that was a wonderful time that we were there. But anyway, if you're in Germany and you're listening, we appreciate you, and we think you guys are awesome. If I may be so bold as to say, Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
So that's about all the German I know. Well, no, I do know this. Hoffentlich bist du morgen gesund.
Is that where's the library?
I think it's good morning.
Oh, okay.
How are you?
All right. Well, is there anything else, Pastor, to say in our 2023 final episode of the Salty Pastor?
Well, I just thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about some of the highs and the lows, like you were saying that the one on guilt was really meaningful
yes.
to you. And I'd have to say one that I'm very passionate about is the one for men, Desperado. Just doing that series is always a highlight for me, and I like to try and do a series for men every year. And so my goal in 2024 is to take the series Desperado and turn it into a book.
Ooh, that'd be cool.
For men, and something that they could just do on their own. The other thing in 2024 that I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit is I'd like to branch out. And if you're a listener, if you could just figure out a way to communicate with us, post a comment, send a note, do whatever, I was wondering if there was some Salty Pastor things that we could do that might help you in your journey of faith. Like, Would it be helpful if we just read passages of Scripture and then we could release them to you on a regular basis, like a Salty Pastor Bible devotion where we just read the text and then maybe make a comment or two, not very much? Or if there's other things that the Salty Pastor could do, would you be interested in doing a Salty Pastor weekly news update where we just talk about, well, this is kind of my perspective on the news of the day?
Right.
Kind of a thing. I don't know. Maybe you're not interested in that at all. But we're just exploring ideas, and we just like to have your feedback because we don't know. We want to be able to reach a broader audience for what we're trying to do. And so I think the highlights that we have coming up and in the past is our desire to grow and want to do new things and try new things.
Yes.
I think some of the lows over the year are trying to. Sometimes when we have to, like when I take time off, I have to record a lot of podcasts back to back, and sometimes
Right.
I feel like I'm just droning off into space, and so I hope that's not the case, and I hope that it's always beneficial to you. But we just want to continue to keep our lows at a minimum and our highs at a maximum. So,
Yes.
What about you? What was your favorite high and low over the year?
Yeah, I thought the series on women was really great. I thought that it was one of the things I was most nervous about us covering, but I think also was really beneficial to a lot of the women that listen, both the Salty Pastor podcast and your messages on Sunday. I thought that was kind of a mixture of both. It was the one that stressed me out the most, but also I think was the one that charted new territory and broke new ground especially for the women that were listening. I thought that was really great. So lows, I think we had, for the most part, we were really solid on all the episodes as far as production value, but we had a couple that had some audio issues or video stuff, so we'll try to minimize those in the next year.
Did I ever sound like Mickey Mouse when I was doing the podcast?
Nothing like that.
Okay.
Nothing like that, but just some little things that were probably not the most enjoyable experience for the people that were listening, or ones where like audio accidentally got muted or whatever. So just little things, nothing that broke anything, but just we'll try to keep those at a minimum. But that's just part of the process when you're releasing 2 episodes a week, 52 weeks of the year. So there's inevitably going to be minor mistakes, and that happens. So, yeah, I think overall those were some of them. I think just spending time with you and learning to dive deeper and grow in my faith. This podcast twice a week just challenges me to grow more. And I think I get to be kind of the conduit that is the first person that listens to the things you're bringing up and gives you immediate feedback. But I'm growing just as much as the people that are listening. So that's been a great pleasure for me as well.
So that's awesome. Yeah, I think it's great. That's one of the beauties of doing this. In the end, I think it's important to understand that we started the Salty Pastor because I just wanted to invite people into the process of how I develop messages. Because people are like, man, your message was just so powerful, and how do you come up with all that? And then I thought, well, instead of just, trying to keep it a secret, I'll show people the secret sauce, and it allows me to formulate and clarify ideas. Because as you know, working with me for the last 3 years, I am an outward processor, right?
Yes, you are.
You're
a verbal processor.
I am a verbal processor. I've got to say it 5 times before I get it right, and I usually say it out loud. So, but the thing about it, I think that it's really important to understand is that my process for developing a message is I always start with the scriptures, and I study the Bible, and I always ask, what is the biblical principle here?
Right.
What is it? And then once I understand it clearly in my mind, then I ask myself, well, what difference does this make in life? What does this biblical principle have to say to a couple that's struggling in their marriage? Or they have kids that they're trying to raise, or a job problem, or a gal or a guy who's trying to date and fall in love, or a man who's struggling with his identity, or a woman who wonders what in the world does it mean to, love and treat my husband with respect, or what does this have to do with what our kids are learning in school? And so I really want the biblical principles to come through in a real life sort of way.
Absolutely.
So that's what the Salty Pastor is really about. It's about the process that I go through to develop the messages on Sunday. And so I just hope that the Salty Pastor can continue to be a blessing in everybody's life, that it's still relevant and it gets you to think in ways maybe you haven't thought before. And what it does is your faith grows and you're willing to share it with your friends, and that more and more people would be willing to be a part of the Salty Pastor audience. I think that would be a really great thing. And so I want to say thank you to the listeners. I hope that your 2023 was a great year, and I look forward to 2024, that God is going to do great things through the Salty Pastor. He's going to do really great things in your life. So let's just praise God and stay focused on him and what he wants to do. And I think that we will look forward to some really great things in 2024.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and we'll see you in 2024 here on the Salty Pastor Podcast.
Happy New Year!